So I don't know if you all noticed, we're sinking to the side a little bit this morning. We've got a few people that aren't here this morning, and we desperately miss them. We know some are out of town, but we always appreciate having them here. We also appreciate all the guests that are here this morning for being here with us, for joining us this morning. Just for a quick bit of business, as a reminder, last week we announced the 4 men who we were going to be appointing as elders this next coming Sunday. So please be here for that. But just, you have one more week. If you have any issues you want to bring up with them, anything you want to talk about, as they say in the wedding, speak now or forever hold your peace. Because once we install them, our goal is to be respectful of them and to work alongside them, not to create problems or try to fight against what we're trying to do. We're supposed to all be on the same biblical page, trying to pursue the glory of God. So if you have anything to speak with those 4 men about, please do so. If you need to come and talk to me about any of it, you are more than welcome to as well. But please, if you're going to say something, sooner rather than later. Don't wait till it's too late. This morning, we're not exactly continuing on with the series we've been doing, but it does connect to it because we're going to continue going through the book of Matthew chapter 5. We're going to be looking at the next section of verses. And the reason I wanted to do this is because it ties so well into what we've been talking about before. We started off talking about what everybody knows as the Beatitudes, or that's what most people call them, in Matthew chapter 5, verses 3 through 12. We talked about the characteristics of those who would be part of the kingdom, or citizens of the kingdom, who would be blessed to have the kingdom, to be called sons of God, to receive mercy, to receive comfort, to have all these things that they'd be blessed with. That's what's described in those verses. Now, in the last 3 verses, the tone changes. And instead of talking about all the things that you are blessed with, Jesus then goes into the idea of the attitude that the world is going to have because of you. Because you're going to be someone who tries to live these ways. Because you're going to try to live in a way that is approved of by God. And so what he gets into in verses 10 through 12, he says, look, this is how the world's going to see you. This is how they're going to approach you. They are going to revile and persecute you. They are going to make all kinds of false claims about you. You are going to be persecuted just as the prophets before you were, just as I was, is the idea that Jesus gets to with all of that. But then here's the really cool thing. When Jesus steps into the next few verses that he speaks, and this is a sermon of his, when he goes into the next few things that he says, he then turns to the very opposite of idea. He says, okay, now this is how the world is going to treat you. This is how the world's going to look at you for what you believe. Here's how I want you to treat the world. Here's how I want you to have an attitude towards the world. Here's the impact that I want you to have for the kingdom. This is what he is going to get to. This is what he's talking about in verses 13 through 16. I'm going to go ahead and read those for you real quick. It says, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. So this is what we are supposed to be doing. This is the kind of impact that we are supposed to have on the world. And so we're going to break down these verses. Basically, verse 13 and then verses 14 through 16 are the 2 topics of discussion. Verse 13 is the salt of the earth. This is one of the ways that we are supposed to impact the earth itself. Now, if you don't know, there's some really interesting things you can find out that the ancients did if you are willing to read some really old literature and things like that, or maybe someone who's rewritten something earlier in a easier to read format. But there's a lot of things that the ancients used salt for, how important it was to them. They used it for seasoning food, Well, that should be simple. We still do that today. They used it for preserving food. You know, we are very blessed to have things like electricity that give us the ability to have refrigeration and freezers to preserve food for long periods of time. They didn't have that. And so they would use salt to preserve their food, to keep it lasting longer so that it wouldn't go bad too quickly. It was important for their lives. They also used it for many medicinal purposes. This was one of the ones that was the most interesting thing to me when I discovered it, because they use it for a lot of things, maybe things we don't use it for today still, but they used it as a cleansing agent for a lot of stuff, including snake bites, wasp stings, those kind of things of that nature. It was a key ingredient in one of their eye salves that they would make for helping treat your eyes if you had issues. They also used it for wrapping your bruises, so they'd put it on the bandages when they'd wrap you to help heal those. All these different things. And the one that I thought might have been the oddest that I came across is that apparently they even used it to help with tooth decay, as well as to drive worms out of the body or out of the stomach. I don't know why. I don't know how that works. I am not a doctor. If you are, feel free to explain all of that to me. I don't know if 4 out of 5 dentists would recommend this to you today. But the interesting thing is what they needed it for. And the point being made here is just how valuable this was to them. How important it was to these people. And one of the really interesting facts is Pliny the Elder, who has written things, who was a very old church father, so to speak, back in the early 1st, 2nd century. He actually even talked about and discussed the idea that he understood that salt was necessary for the body to function, that it helped maintain the correct balances in your body to do what it needed to do. Now, he didn't necessarily break it all the way down and have the knowledge that we do today with science, that he understood that you needed sodium and potassium in order to function all the gates in your body, to open things, to close things, so that all those things, if you don't have the sodium, if you don't have the salt, you don't function. But he also understood you needed the right amount. You didn't necessarily need to have an over amount of salt, otherwise that could be just as detrimental. It's just really neat the way they figured things out, and even before all the technology we have today, how important all of this was to them. So important, in fact, that they actually used it to pay people. Could you imagine getting paid in salt? This is what Roman soldiers would sometimes get paid in. That's where the saying came in. I don't know if you know this, but worth your weight in salt. That's where this comes from. They used to get paid in salt, and they could use it for whatever they needed to. They could even resell it to other people who needed it, or anything along those lines. And then one of the last things, again, I didn't know until I read, is apparently they also used it for fertilizer. Now, again, this is one of those instances where they understood that you didn't put too much salt because it would cause the crop to die. It would destroy the land. But if you put just a little bit, if you put just enough, it would actually help increase the crop and make it grow better and stronger. Again, I don't know what works today. I'm not a farmer. You can tell me if this is something that still gets used. I have no clue. But it was essential to them at the time. And why it's so important that Jesus uses metaphors like these, not only because it meant something to the people he was talking to, but we can relate to it to a degree. We understand what salt is. We can still understand today how salt is used in many things, what it has, what properties it carries. There's a lot that can be said about it. But it's essential. Today is no different. And so Jesus uses this metaphor of salt for a reason. He uses this metaphor to inspire his followers, his disciples. Now, we know he's specifically talking to the 12 and maybe all those who are following right there along with him. But we as readers, we as those who would call ourselves disciples, would lump ourselves right in here with him. If you are a follower of his, he is trying to inspire you with his words right here, trying to tell you that you are to be a powerful influence on the world, just like salt was. Everything that was used for, everything that was needed for, we are supposed to be a powerful influence. We are supposed to be, and this might sound weird, we are supposed to be the fertilizer that helps the good seed grow. We're supposed to be the ones that help the good news to flourish in the kingdom, flourish in the world, so that it can have the fullest effect that it's supposed to. That is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to have that impact of the world. Now, we also see that in this short verse, he gives a warning not to be tasteless, not to lose your saltiness, so to speak. One of the cool things about salt is that pure salt never loses its flavor, to what I understand. The only time it loses its flavor is when it gets mixed with impurities. That's the only way. So I want you to think about 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33. This isn't necessarily talking about salt in any particular way, but it says, bad company corrupts good morals. You think about the idea of being pure salt, being a pure influence, but then you spend time with people who create difficulties in you remaining pure to God, anything like that. It can cause a corruption of what you're trying to do and how you're trying to influence. I'm not up here trying to tell you that you can't hang out with your friends by any means, but I'm saying you have to be aware of the kind of influence that you're supposed to be having. And if somebody is having an influence on you that is changing what influence you can have that God expects you to have, then you have to be careful, because you don't want to lose your salt. You don't want to lose your flavoring agent, as you might say. We're going to read in a minute Ephesians chapter 5, but it talks about us needing to keep away from sin. That's how we keep away from all that impurity. That's how we make sure that we can maintain our saltiness, so to speak. In chapter 5, starting in verse 3, it says, "But immorality or any impurity or greed must not even be named among you, as it is proper among saints. And there must be no filthiness and silly talk or coarse gesturing, which is not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. For this you know with certainty, that no immoral or impure person or covetous man who is an idolater has an inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore, do not be partakers with them." So this is the idea here. We're talking, Jesus has turned the focus around of how we're supposed to influence the world. And so we need to take to heart the fact that we're not supposed to let the world have the bad influence on us. We're supposed to be the ones that are making the influence, that are creating the influence, that are impacting the world for good. And he says, of all these bad things, don't be a part of them. That doesn't mean you can't have a friend in the world that maybe takes part in things that you don't want to be a part of, but you don't have to go and be a part with them. You can still be there to influence them, to try to reach them, to reach out to them for Christ, to make the gospel known. But that doesn't mean you have to actively sin in your own life just to have a chance to help them find Christ. That's not proper among the saints, as it talks about here. Now, we also have to understand what will happen if we don't remain salty, so to speak. If we don't hold on to that, if we become tasteless. He says, how are we going to become salty again? Now, we know that there's forgiveness of sin in this life, and if we turn back to God, he will always be there for us. But the idea here is that if you're going to turn away from God, if you're going to allow the world to influence you rather than you influence the world, what good are you? You're only good to be thrown out. You're useless. Now, one of the things, and I wish I could have found a good old picture of how they used to do it. I know I actually found pictures of people that still do it, or corporations that still do it today. But the way they used to get salt primarily back in that time is they would evaporate seawater. Now, what you're going to find, I mean, think about the Dead Sea over there, the salt content, there's a lot. But what they would have to do is they'd evaporate it and they would get the salt, but they would also get other minerals and things that weren't necessarily important. But what they would do is pile it all up, and they would get all the pure salt that they could get out of it as needed. But the problem is when the rain came, if they didn't use all of that salt before the rain came, it would wash the salt away, and all you'd have left is all those other minerals and chemicals that are left, and it would be a dry, hard mound of whatever it is. And all it was good for, and this is where the saying comes in, is it would be broken up and thrown across the street so that it could be trampled on and put back into the ground. All the salt's gone. That mound is now useless. There's nothing good left in it. We don't want to become that way. That's not the goal that God has for us. That's not the desire He has for us. He wants us to make an impact for the kingdom. He wants to make an impact on the world. And in order to do that, we can't become tasteless. We have to be useful. We have to be fruitful. We have to be what He asks us to be each and every day. The second part of this that we're going to talk about is the light of the world. This is Matthew chapter 14, or Matthew chapter 5, verse 14 through 16. In this, he talks a lot about light, and one of the things to notice about light is light tends to be in the Bible a symbol of truth, of purity, of righteousness, all those kind of things. But one of the things you'll notice is in the Old Testament, God asked Israel to be the light. Not just us, not just the New Testament. Jesus brought this back too. But He did ask the Israel people to be a light to the Gentile nations. You can see that in Isaiah chapter 49. He says, I will also make you a light to the nations so that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth. Now that also might be a future statement of what Jesus was going to do, because we know that Israel didn't always live up to the missions that God gave them. Sometimes they failed. Well, sometimes we fail too, but we don't want to do that. We don't want to repeat the mistakes that they did. We don't want to forget what God has created us to be. We want to be that light that we have asked us to be. Now, Jesus, one of the things you're going to find is that He passed His role on to His followers. And we know that because He was the light of the world. We know that He was the light of the world. We're not trying to take that away from Him. That's what it talks about in John, I believe, 8, chapter 12. It says, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have light of life. Jesus is the light of the world. He is the true light, the original light, the one who came in to bring salvation, the only one that salvation can come through. But what we do know is that He passed that role on to His followers. We are also supposed to be the light. In Philippians chapter 2, it says, children of God, above reproach in the midst of a perverse nation, among whom you appear as lights in the world. He understood even at that time that the generations were not perfect, that they were perverse, as he puts it. But even among generations like that, he says, you are to be the light. You're supposed to be the one that has an impact on them, the one that they reach out to, the one that they try to find in the darkness so that they can find their freedom from sin through His sacrifice, through believing in Him. His servants, which is us, are supposed to reflect that light. In Ephesians chapter 5, we're going to continue reading where we were, starting in verse 8. It says, formerly you were formerly darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness and righteousness and truth, trying to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them. For it is disgraceful even to speak of the things which are done by them in secret, but all things become visible when they are exposed by the light. For everything that becomes visible is light. There's a powerful impact that light is supposed to have in the darkness. You know, one of the things that I really liked about this graphic is that it's a very dark image. But what's the one thing that your eye picks out very easily? It's the light. If you were in a dark room, and I know the sun's out, so it wouldn't be pitch black in here if we shut off all the lights. But if you were in a dark room with no light, except for there's one light in the far corner away from you, what do you think your eyes are going to focus on? What do you think your eyes are going to notice? There's a natural desire to go towards the light, to not live in the darkness. There's a contrast all throughout the Bible of light and darkness. From the very beginning of Genesis, Jesus is the light. He is the true light that we are supposed to be going towards. He is the true light that we as his followers are supposed to be reflecting. We're supposed to be reflecting him to the rest of the world so that they have the ability to find him just as we did. In 1 Peter chapter 2, it also says this, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. If you remember the first part of that verse, that's the one who says you are a chosen nation, priesthood, all those things. And then at the end he says all the reasons that you are called a chosen race, a chosen people, you are my own possession, is for this reason. Your job is to proclaim the excellencies of him. You are to reflect his light to the rest of the world. Reflect it so that other people can find him, just as we have. Because he has a desire for all men to be saved, not just us in this room, not just those who are sitting in another church somewhere else. All those who are out in the world, who don't know God, who haven't chosen to believe in Christ. He has a desire for all to be saved. And because the truth is, the world needs the light. It needs the light of truth, which is Christ, to guide it out of the spiritual darkness that engulfs it. And if you don't believe that there's a spiritual darkness that engulfs the world today, then you haven't been looking very hard. We know the world is turning away from God. We know it's turning rapidly in some cases. But that doesn't mean our job is done. That doesn't mean we give up. It means we have to work that much harder to be exactly who we were supposed to be from the very beginning, to be the light of the world, to help people find the light in that darkness, to reflect the light of Christ in our own lives, so that when people look at you, they can see Christ living in you and say, you know what, I might need to go check some of this out. I need to see what all this is about. You know, we already talked about the fact that Jesus is the one and true light. We aren't light in and of ourselves. It's not power that we have without God. Only the Lord is the one and true light. We simply reflect him, just as the moon reflects the sun. It's not power that we get from ourselves. Jesus is the true light. But we as citizens are supposed to be the luminaries that reflect that one true light. We are supposed to be the one who help guide or shine it in a direction it needs to go. To not let that light dim and die out. This is what he has asked us to do. This is the call to work that he has put towards us. We can't let that go. If we do, where is the world going to be? So we have this twofold responsibility in these three verses here. What we're supposed to do is the light of the world. It says we're supposed to be visible. We're not supposed to be hidden in any way. It's implied in the idea of his usage of the word city and lampstand. You know, it says we're supposed to be a city on a hill. Well, I'll be honest, I don't really care if you're a city on a hill or city in a hole. If you're a city, you're probably easy to see compared to one house. But the idea is that you have a whole city on a hill that's lit up. People are going to be able to look to you and see you. You can't hide it. And then the idea of the lampstand is you don't light a candle and put it in a house and put a basket over the top of it. What good is it to light that candle unless you're trying to potentially burn your house down? Now, if you know anything about the architecture of their day, is they would have a lampstand that goes along like a central beam. And the lampstand would be up on the wall, and so you would put the candle on the lampstand, and the light would hit the beam, and it would help run it all the way through the house, so that you could see better throughout the whole house. The whole point was putting it in the right position to be visible enough to actually help everybody see. That is the point of who we're supposed to be. We are supposed to be visible. You know, we understand that we live in the world but aren't of the world. But sometimes we forget that we need to still be making an impact on the world. We still need to be visible enough that people know who we are. When people look at you, when they talk to you, do they assume from the first few minutes of your conversation that you're a Christian? Can they even tell that you are? How visible do you make yourself as a follower of Christ? That's what we're talking about here. We need to be visible light in a world of darkness. Jesus expects his followers to be seen by the world. not to be hidden, not to try to hide or to deny who we are. He wants us to be seen so that we will be effective. Because what good is a light if you hide it? What good is a light if you put it underneath something where it won't shine? The other responsibility is that we are to be radiant light. He says, let your light shine before men. So now not only are you visible, but you are supposed to be out there shining your light with purpose. This is conveyed in the idea of the lamp, as I talked about, how it purposely beams its light in the house from the right spot. We're supposed to be radiating our light out into the world, radiating God's light, His glory, the glory of Christ and the salvation He brings. We can't hide it. The idea, as I said, it comes from that idea that we're supposed to let our light shine. That is an imperative word in your Bible. That means it is a command that we are supposed to do as followers of Christ. This is not something that He has simply said, it would be a good idea if you did this. I would really like you to do this. No, this is something He says, I expect you to do this. If you are going to follow me, if you are going to be the kind of person that is characterized by all those Beatitudes we talked about, yeah, you might have persecution from the world, but this is what I expect you to do for the world. Help the world. Help them by being the light. Help them by being the salt, the impact, the salvation that they need to help find me. So how can we help ourselves to become better salt, better light of the world in our lives? Just a few things to think about here. Why even make the effort? Why should we make the effort to be salt and to be light? Well, as I just said, this was the charge that Jesus gave to us. He didn't ask us in particular to do this just out of our good nature or for any particular good sense that we had. He charged us to do this. He wanted us to be the salt of the earth, the light of the world. He didn't want the world to be cast into darkness with no guide to help it out. He wanted us to have the most impact that we possibly could. And that's what He expects us to do. He challenged us to reflect His light. He challenged us to reflect Him to the rest of the world. So you are the salt of the earth. What does that mean for you? It means you should not be bland. You should not be dull. You should not be full of lifeless, non-spiritual energy. You have to be someone who is actually making an impact, who is flavoring the world for Christ, who is causing good things to happen, is helping preserve souls rather than food. You're supposed to stand out. You know, I don't know if anybody's accidentally ever made the mistake or been pranked on with the whole, somebody undid the lid of the salt shaker, and so when you went and put salt on something, it dumped out the whole contents. Did you ever try to eat that food after that happened? That salt on there stands out pretty well, doesn't it? Well, it doesn't really take a lot of salt for it to stand out. I mean, that's an abundant amount, but it doesn't take a lot. But the fact is it's supposed to stand out. It's not supposed to blend in. We're supposed to be noticeably out in the world, creating better things for the world, for Christ, trying to help people that we come in contact with. And not only are we supposed to stand out, but we are also supposed to be different because we are supposed to make a difference. It's not just simply being out of the world and not of the world. It does say we live in the world. And while we do live in the world, just as the Apostle Paul once said, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. Well, it's gain to die because he gets to go be with Christ. But if he lives, it's for Christ because while he lives on this earth, he is going to make the most of his time to impact the people around him, to help them trying to find Christ. That is the same idea of what we're supposed to do here. We're supposed to be the salt of the earth that makes that difference while we're here for the time that we have. We do what we can. Well, what about the light of the world? How do we understand that as far as applying it to ourselves? As I said, our world is engulfed in spiritual darkness. I mean, you might be able to say that it's literal darkness in some senses, not just spiritual. But it's engulfed no matter what. But the one thing that the light can do is dispel the dark. The light will always overcome the dark. Jesus is the true light that has already done that for us. But we are supposed to continue reflecting that light so that darkness will stay away. We are the lights that are supposed to shine and guide people to Christ, the one true light. That is how we apply this to ourselves. Are you guiding people to Christ? Are you helping dispel the darkness of the world by standing out against it? By not blending in? By not trying to hide your light for fear of the persecution that Jesus said was going to happen? We have to be able to guide people. It also requires us, and this is something I mentioned already, to lead our lives in a way that Christ can be seen living in us. Again, one of the things that I always appreciated, somebody that was teaching at a Bible camp one year, one of the older men was teaching the young kids that I had in my class, and he was asking him, he said, even at your age, can your friends tell that you're a Christian? I mean, is it easy for someone to walk up to you and just by the way you talk, by the way you act, can they tell that you believe in God? Or have you been hiding it? Have you been hiding the fact that Christ is living in you? Is Christ really living in you if nobody can see it? We need to live in a way that Christ shines through us. That's really the idea here. We are simply the prism that expands that light as much as possible that Christ has already shown. We are supposed to be there shining and reflecting that light on His behalf, not for ourselves. It's probably true, and it's probably fair to assume that each and every one of you in this room is probably here because someone reflected the light of Christ into your life. Maybe you're here and it was like most, maybe your parents or someone in your family who started bringing you to church as a kid, and you had instilled in you some of the principles of the Bible early on. Or maybe for some of you it was the friends or the colleagues, the people that you went up in arms with. Maybe even someone like me as a preacher or an elder or a mentor or something along those lines. Or maybe it was even others outside of those examples. Maybe it was simply the fact that you picked up the Word of God and you found the light on your own. But someone, whether it was Jesus Himself in His Word, or if it was someone else, someone brought you here today. Someone made it possible for you to find Christ. Don't stop that with you. Don't be the last one in that line. Pay it forward. Be the one who helps the next person or the next several people find Christ. Because someone out there needs you. And God knows that. Christ knows that. That's why He has asked you to be the impact on the earth that He has said right here in these verses. He wants you to be the salt. He wants you to be the light so that you can help people find Him. He knows there's people out there. He wasn't going to be on this earth forever. He's left it up to us to continue that work, just like He left it up to His apostles when He left the earth to continue the work then. Don't be the generation that ends this work. Be the one that picks it up and bolsters it forward. Help people to find God. Help people to find Christ. Help yourself to show Christ living in you by doing these things. This morning, I hope this lesson has been helpful for you. I hope it's been inspiring for you. I hope it's been something that has maybe challenged you, because that's what it's supposed to be. Jesus is challenging His disciples here, His followers. That includes us. To go be something for the world, not just for ourselves. Because when we live for Christ, we aren't living for ourselves. We're living to serve whatever we can do for Him. And this is what He's asked us to do. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to meet that challenge in your life? If you're here this morning and maybe you haven't taken up this challenge in your life because you've never become a Christian, you've never started following Jesus, take it up today. He is waiting for you. He is here for you. He is the true light, and He is guiding you to your eternal rest. Come and be with Him. Be with us. Maybe you're here this morning and you have taken up the challenge, but you forgot to really start putting one foot in front of the other. You don't have to start big. Start small. You just have to start. Let that be today. Change your attitude, change your mentality. Don't worry about the persecution that might come about from the world. Be more concerned about what Christ has asked you to do for the world. But if there's anything we can do for you this morning, I hope that you will come as together we stand and sing.